So a couple months ago, my son, who's a police officer here in San Antonio, he had to work overtime, and he called me and he's like, "Dad, I can't get home in time to walk my dog. He has a house and he has a dog, and he's like, Dad, would you go by the house and walk my dog?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because everybody that knows me knows, one, I love my son and I do anything I can to help him anytime he asks. Two, I'm retired, so it's like I got free time. And three, I absolutely adore dogs, so it's like, man, you don't have to twist my arm to ask me to go hang out with your dog, because I love dogs. So it was an easy win. It was like, yeah, I'll go walk your dog. So I go to his house, and he's got about 120-pound Rottweiler. And I get the leash, and me and his dog, we just start walking his neighborhood. And he lives in a new development in a suburb out here. And we're just checking out the neighborhood, strolling through. And as we're walking, I just felt somebody staring at me. And you can sort of sense when somebody's staring at you. As I looked over and I noticed the guy was staring dead at me. And at first I thought, maybe he's just admiring, the Rottweiler, because it's a magnificent looking dog. And then I looked back and I realized, no, he's staring dead at me. And so I just returned gaze. And I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, well, this is strange because, one, I understand, I'm 55 and I'm old, but I'm with a 120-pound Rottweiler. There's got to be easier victims to start trouble with. And because, unbeknownst to him, is, like I'm a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu black belt, and we're in Texas, and Texas believes in the Second Amendment, so we're all allowed to carry. And so I'm always armed. So it's like, dude, you are picking the wrong person to cause some trouble with. And that's what's going through my mind. And then, as he continues to stare at me, he said, "Is your name Saad al-Aziz?" And I'm like, "Well, yes, it is." And he's like, "I can't believe it's you." He's like, "You were my recruit company commander in boot camp in the early 1990s. And I'm like, "What?" And what's so strange is I pushed recruits for the Navy. The Navy calls it recruit company commander. I think now they call it recruit division commanders. But most other services call them drill instructors. It's the person that's yelling and screaming, having you do push-ups in boot camp, and filtering out the people that are not suitable for naval service. And I did that from 1990 to 1993 in Great Lakes, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago, Illinois. And what was strange is that one is two sailors who met in Illinois, and sailors are not normally here in San Antonio, Texas, because there are no ships. There's no water here in San Antonio. We're not next to an ocean. Most retired sailors, or sailors when they get out, they retire in Norfolk, Virginia, San Diego, California, Mayport, Florida, Bremerton, Washington, like by the seaports. And, that's where most sailors end up, just because that's where they spend most of their career. Of course, there's odds and ends sailors that go back to their hometowns. But here the two of us were, after 30 years, we run into each other, two sailors running into each other in some little podunk town in Texas that's not by the water. And that was just wow. I was like, man. But what was also strange is after 30 years, he remembered my face. And this is a face that, like 30 years ago, I had hair. One, I was in my 20s, vice in my 50s. Also, didn't have a beard. I didn't even have a mustache. I was clean shaven. But after 30 some years, he could see me across the street. We're in a place where neither one of us expected to run into each other. And he immediately recognized who I was. And that leads to the question of this week's topic, which is why you should not be a bully, or why you should not treat people badly. And the moral of the story, because my wife would hear this whole story, and some of y'all just heard that whole story and say, like, what's that got to do with the topic? Like this, you walking a dog in the neighborhood and a guy recognizing you from boot camp 30 years ago. Good question. What it has to do with it, because old people, we like to tell our stories. And you just have to be patient and listen to the story. What it has to do with it is, had I done him wrong 30 years ago, he remembered my face. After 30 years, he never forgot who I was in my face. And you should remember that in your human relations dealings. If you do somebody terribly wrong, they're not going to forget your face. They're not going to forget your name. They will remember you. Even after so much time and father time changing the way we looked, they will remember you. And although many laws have a statute of limitation, humans don't have a statute of limitations on vengeance. And had I done him wrong, I could have very well experienced his vengeance 30 years after the fact, because he remembered who I was and I had no idea who he was. No earthly idea who he was. And the point of that and how it applies to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is like a lot of the early Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioners. And unfortunately, still today, some Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioners are into the business of being bullies or starting fights in clubs or beaches or getting into altercations and causing severe injuries. And a lot of times when a person wins a fight like that, they think, oh, that's the end of it. I taught them their lesson. Maybe they bumped into me or, whatever it is that made you think you should beat this person up. But just because they lost that fight don't mean that it's over for them. For you, it might be over. For them, they might be laying in wait to one day get you back. And you won't remember their face, but they'll remember you. So the moral of the story is treat people right. Don't go looking for trouble. Don't go causing trouble. And that's something that's haunted us in martial arts. It's haunted us in a lot of athletics. Like you talk to anybody in a high school or that has gone through high school, middle school, and who are the bullies in school? Members of the football team, maybe? They have a tendency to be bullies, or a lot of times athletes, cheerleaders, they have a tendency to be bullies in their little group. And that person that you bullied may not forget you. And they may one day decide to get back at you. And you will have forgotten their face and just be totally surprised. And, several times over the years, I've run into former recruits in places I didn't expect to run into them. And fortunately, apparently I didn't do them wrong. So, none of them sought vengeance on me. But it's something to keep in mind. So don't go around looking for trouble. Just because you've got a skill set and you think, man, I can win these fights. You could look up a video. 2 Oklahoma University football players ended up attacking 2 smaller guys. It looked like they was definitely in a restroom, but it looked like maybe it was a club, maybe it was a restaurant. And one of the big football players smacks this little guy, and they got him cornered in this restroom. And then one of the smaller guys says to his friend, I'll take this one, you take that one. And then when the football player went to hit him again, what they did not know, these 2 big 300-pound football players did not realize, was these 2 little guys were professional MMA fighters. They weren't in the UFC, but they were, some other smaller circuit. And those 2 little guys severely injured those 2 football players. Like somebody was recording the whole thing. And I think they was recording it because they thought that the 2 football players were going to win. And the moral of that story is you may have a skill set, and those football players were big and strong, athletic, and they thought oh, this is going to go well for me. And maybe for years, situations like that has gone well for them where they've won. But on that night, they picked the wrong 2 guys, and they were definitely taken out by ambulances because you could tell from the video, the beating that was being administered, it was all bad, and it was all in favor of the MMA fighters. The football players were in no way prepared to defend themselves against these 2 MMA fighters who just totally outclassed them, even though they were outweighed by at least 100+ pounds. So treat people well, and just realize if you got a fight, man, make that a last resort. Because if you do somebody wrong, they're not going to forget your face. And there may come a time, and there's no statute of limitation for revenge. There may come a time where you have forgotten them, but they haven't forgotten you, and you fall into their revenge. So be careful with that. So only use your fighting skills as a last resort. That's my message for this week's question of the week. Don't be a bully. All right. If you got a question for next week, feel free to fire below. Until then, ciao.